Bismillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the second installment of a discussion from the Taba Foundation, and we're joined here by a number of members of the Taba family to discuss the oppressor and the oppressed, understanding the reality of who the oppressor is, who the oppressed is or are, what is oppression. We're having that discussion, and we're joined here by a number of amazing men, Ustad Tabari, Ustad Malcolme Morgan, Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin, all of whom began their relationship with Taba while incarcerated. And so we felt it would be a wonderful opportunity for really everybody online to hear about oppression from people who have seen the dungeons of the Pharaoh, to seen one of the most oppressive systems on the face of this earth currently and historically, and then also analyze what we see manifested in society. Malcolme is our guest today on the show, and mashallah, I've known him for a number of years. He was still is a dedicated student, an amazing artist. I mentioned last week about this book, and I'm going to go ahead and plug the book, Malcolme. I should have never joined a gang. You can get it on Amazon, and maybe you can also tell us. I think there's an audio book of you reading it as well. I encourage everybody listening, whether the reality of gangs whether gangs are or are not a reality in your community, get this book to see, and it's really artistic. I'm not going to give you any spoilers. Get the book and read it. He's also versified. We have some of the books that we teach here at Taba, and Malcolme has versified a text on Aqidah, on theology, a text on Sirah that he authored himself. He wrote out the entire book, put it into poetry form, and illustrated as well. We hope that book will be published soon. And then his most recent endeavor is a English versification, English poetry of a introductory book on Maliki Fiqh Ibn Ashir, and which is, I mean, it's amazing for so many reasons. But I'll end on this and then turn it over to the brothers to take it over. That this is a sign to me of the mastery of Sunni Islam, of the Deen of Islam, by people who are from this land, who understand the Deen and understand the people, and then can transfer that knowledge to their communities. And that's what's happening. And then taking that, and it's one of the highest levels in education, where a person not only learns, but they produce something new. And so that's what Malcolme has done with his English versification, and it's going to make that knowledge that much more accessible to the English-speaking audience. So it's really phenomenal, the work that he's doing. He's also doing a lot of work in pillars. We want to hear a little bit about that today. But today the discussion is, and I'll turn it over to Ustad Tabari and Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin to continue the discussion. And I'm just going to be listening in. One of the things is that I was asked to join, and I said, really, my voice, I want to listen. And there's a concept in Islam called dhawq, direct experiential knowledge. And if a person does not have dhawq, they cannot speak on that from experience. They can only speak it on outside. And I don't know what it is to be a black man living in America. And so what I'm doing these last couple of weeks and last month is listening. I'm listening to podcasts and reading books. I want to understand more, because I will never have that dhawq. But what I'm going to do here, and what I encourage everybody in the audience, is to listen, open your ears. The Quran talks about uznun wa'iyah, have an open ear to those people who have the dhawq of the matter and can speak on that. So Bismillah.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulil Kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa min tabi'uhum bi ihsan ila yawm ad-din wa hum yafaqihuna fi din wa 'allamna ta'wil. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Brother Malcolme, pleasure seeing you, albeit online. You know, we've talked a few times on the phone over the years, but it's a good time for us to be able to get here and be able to talk about some things. Brother Issa speaks highly of you. So, you know, got to be some good there, inshallah. But just to start off, and knowing that you're here and you're one of the Taba students over the years who has been productive inside and outside of prison, just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and some of your story, inshallah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad Yeah, I'm just pretty much a regular person from the not only the dungeons of Firaun, but you know the disadvantaged, marginalized communities of this country. You know, I grew up in San Diego, um, born in the '80s, so you know that's a time where you know we have whole communities that were basically affected by chemical warfare, uh, along with you know ingenious and cunning plots to separate families and warehouse you know hundreds of thousands, millions of people actually. So I came up, you know, and everything that Shaitan beautified was beautiful to me, you know. Everything that was wrong seemed right, and everything that was right seemed wrong. So, you know, it didn't take long for me to leave school and find myself in a position where I was doing things that would lead to my incarceration. And I ended up at 19 years old. I ended up being sentenced. Actually, took a plea bargain for 13 years in prison for essentially robbing some weed dealers. You know, the person I was with had a fake gun. You know, and I ended up taking that on a plea deal because my maximum sentence was 35 years to life uh, for the pairing of a robbery slash home invasion, right? And I ended up in prison, finally reaching the point where I realized that, or admitted to myself that I didn't know anything about my history. I didn't know anything about my religion. I didn't know anything, period, really, and other than the streets. And this is, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me to Islam. But even in studying Islam, I didn't have access for a number of years to a teacher or a guide, and I ended up finding myself being exposed to a lot of problematic material. I would read books, I would read quotes out of books, and I would buy the book based on the quote. And sometimes that book would be a book written by an Orientalist, you know, and it's just poison about Islam, you know. But alhamdulillah, through all of that, it became evident that even the people that hate Islam, they have to attest to the veracity of the Quran, you know, the preservation of the Quran, and even the sincerity of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even the people that hate Islam, they even, you know, would admit that they did not accept the divine revelation or the prophethood of our beloved prophet, but they even accepted the sincerity of this man, you know, which is kind of an oxymoron, really. But so alhamdulillah, you know, I finally when I reached California City, I started studying with Taiba Foundation, and you know, alhamdulillah, that's probably one of the most beneficial things that I did while I was incarcerated. I mean, you know, other than uh, accepting Islam in the first place, because I, you know, I see how even in the Deen, it's already bad enough that you have a whole lot of different ideologies and so much falsehood pulling in so many different directions. But even in Islam, it can be easy to be carried away to one extreme or the other, right? So, you know, alhamdulillah, you know, Taiba offers a balanced approach and a well-rounded approach to the Deen, which I think is important. And so I came home and initially just began to volunteer to see who's on the ground doing work to actually uplift the people. Because I did, even before I even became Muslim, I came to the conclusion that, you know, that this system is unjust, and that it needed major work, and that if the work was going to be done, then, you know, that the people that were actually affected by it should be the ones that should be doing the work. If they're blessed enough and fortunate enough to make it out of the system, you know, and out of prison, then they have work to do, because, you know, they understand. And at the end of the day, a lot of our nephews and sons and daughters are going to be tomorrow's victims if we don't try to put in the work to actually to change it. So I started volunteering with different organizations to see who was doing what, and I saw that you know, even in that, in the quest for justice, or the fighting against oppression, or whatever you want to call it, that there's a lot of groups that are essentially their aim is money and funding, you know, and a whole lot of change isn't really being made outside of lip service. So I started volunteering with pillars of the community, and alhamdulillah, I saw that you know, that change was actually being pursued, and small gains were actually being made. I mean, that's all we can really hope to do, is make small gains, because the task is so momentous. And alhamdulillah, I've been on that ever since. And I mean, most importantly, aside from trying to put in work to try to make a difference, the biggest task, I think, is preserving my Islam, you know, out here in society. You know, that's the biggest task, and that's the biggest struggle, you know. And that's you know, probably the brunt of my work right now, maintaining my deen, and you know, fighting against myself. Alhamdulillah.
So what are some of the challenges you find with doing that?
I find that a lot of the times, the things that we feel like we've suppressed, or that we've conquered in prison, we really just lack the opportunity or environment for that aspect of ourselves to come out, right? And sometimes you don't know how deep a wound really is until you find yourself in a position where you see an old face that may trigger up some old feelings. And it's really a reality check that you still have some demons that you haven't quite dealt with, you know. So that's always a reality check. And then also, I'm also reminded how quickly, and sometimes it really shakes me up, how fast one split second decision, or one person's failure to think, or to not be able to hold their emotions in check, can turn your whole life upside down, you know. So I'm, you know, I found myself in situations that have been real reality checks that I still have a lot of work to do, you know, and it's humbling, but it's scary at the same time.
But with that, knowing this within the challenge, I'm going to give Ilstaff Tabari a chance to speak. I want to ask you one more question. How has the community accepted you since you've been back? What are the challenges that you've had to deal with the general Muslim community outside of your other community? Because it seems as if you came and you started doing the community work, and that's been going good for you. You found a position, you've been doing a lot of good things in the community. You've been interacting with the city officials and county, I think it's the county officials y'all have been interacting with too, on somewhat of a scale. So how has the Muslim community helped you along in this struggle that you're working with?
There's a number of Muslims that are active in, you know, on that field, as far as trying to make a difference. But there's also a lot of Muslims who have a very different view, and, you know, at least from my perspective, it seems to be a very narrow-minded view, you know. But I understand that also that a lot of people, their perspective is a lot different, because their objective of coming to this country was based on the ideal that America prides itself on, you know, that it's a land of equal opportunity for everybody, you know, and total freedom for everybody. So I run into a lot of Muslims that they pretty much ascribe to this ideal as well. So when you start talking about, you know, fighting for equality and justice, you know, they look at you like you're crazy, you know. So, you know, I've seen that, and for the most part, it's been love. It's been a lot of love, you know, from the Muslims. But it's also kind of another thing that's kind of saddening is just the cliquish, almost gang-like mentality that exists amongst the Muslims as well too. You know, you have Muslims that totally denounce anything political, right? Any involvement with politics. But politic when it comes to, you know, their own religious factions or organizations or groups, you know. So that's also something that's pretty ironic, but I don't let it bother me too much.
Ustaz.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khairan, Lady Malcolm, for coming on. You know, we've been paying attention to the work that you've been doing, and so we're honored to have you. I guess what I would like to do is just, you know, kind of lay down a framework for the discussion, inshallah, that we're going to have today. You know, the series is called The Oppressor and the Oppressed, but the title of today's session is What Happens as a Result of Oppression. And so I just want to kind of just lay down some, you know, some foundations so that we can have a full discussion about, like, you know, what happens. So alhamdulillah, you know, we're all Muslim, and our, you know, our life, even our daily life in, you know, in Islam is akhirah centered. What we do on a daily basis, we never lose sight of Yawm ad-Din, that we will meet Allah and we will give an account for what we do, what we said, what we neglected. And one of the things that we try to stay away from as much as possible is being an oppressor. We try to stay away, we try to stay far, far away from this, because Rasulullah, the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said very clearly that whoever has a speck, a particle of arrogance in their heart, they will not enter Jannah. And then he explained what this arrogance was. He was talking to his companions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was talking to his companions, and one of them, you know, just to clarify, he said, but you look good. I like to wear nice clothes and I like to wear nice shoes, you know. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, not that. Allah is Jameel. Wa yuhibbul Jamal. Allah is beautiful and he loves beauty, right? But arrogance, that will prevent you from entering into paradise, you know, it's a refusal to accept or acknowledge what is correct, what is right, what you know to be right and correct. And the second part that he talked about, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was considering that others are beneath you. And, you know, this is what we're kind of dealing with. And this is what we're dealing with when we talk about police brutality, when we talk about racism, when we talk about, you know, discrimination, you know, isolating, you know, different groups because of the color of their skin or their culture, etc., etc. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as he always does, he summed it up very, very beautifully. So I would just like to talk a little bit about what happens in two realms. Number one, the otherworldly, because we are akhirah centered. We want to know what happens spiritually to a person. What is at risk on the day of judgment if a person has this arrogance in his heart? If a person is an oppressor because of this arrogance, what will happen? And then what happens worldly? What happens here on earth? And so I just want to kind of just, you know, just throw out some themes here. You know, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about, you know, those who are arrogant, you know, إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ. Allah does not love those who wax proud. They're arrogant. Allah does not love those. You know, meaning, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying, never in the Quran does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that he hates someone, but he does say that he hates the actions. Okay? And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love someone, what that person is losing is the mercy of Allah, the guidance of Allah, the protection of Allah, you know, and all of those beautiful spiritual characteristics that Allah promises to those that he loves. Okay? A person, one of the major diseases of the heart that Imam Ghazali, he illuminates in his, revivification of the Islamic sciences, Ihya Ulumuddin, is, kibr, arrogance. And he talks about how ugly it is. He talks about how bad it is. He tries to help people to overcome it. But so that's like another thing that happens. A person loses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love. And also a person, he accumulates this disease in his heart. He accumulates this disease in his heart. A person puts his Jannah at risk. You're putting your Jannah at risk if you have arrogance and pride, which has been defined by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as refusal to accept the truth. When somebody says, no, you are oppressing these people, and then you kill the one who told you that truth. Or you say, no, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Or they say Black lives matter. And then you say, no, all lives matter. As if what the other person was saying was not true. Okay, this is very important. All right. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala associates in the Quran, the arrogant, he associates them with shaitan. And then worldly, what the oppressor is doing is taking away the rights of the person. Or like Sheikh Rami said in the last session, is to place things where they don't belong. Everything is topsy-turvy, it's upside down, it's not right, as what has happened to African Americans in this society, and other groups also, Latinos, American Indians, etc., etc. So there's a loss of rights. There's also this transgenerational trauma that happens, and it expresses itself in a lot of ways. People can have self-hatred. They can have hatred for the color of their skin. And then they can pass that on in the neighborhood when they make jokes about the color of someone's skin, make a young person hate their color. And this comes from, white supremacy and racism and arrogance, thinking that you're better because of the color of your skin, and on and on and on. But like I said, I just wanted to lay a foundation so that we can kind of talk about what happens as a result of this oppression. What happens otherworldly and worldly. And so with that, inshallah, I'll turn it back over to you, Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin, and we can keep the show going, inshallah. Bismillah.
Well, in light of that framework, one of the things that got me to thinking is just understanding how the decisions all of us made at a young age to do certain things. Like myself, I started selling drugs and doing all kinds of stuff when I turned 12 and moved to Atlanta to go stay with my father. And it wasn't so much as a result of having this desire to be some type of bad person or anything, but it was, like you say, it was a mentality that was placed within me because of what we felt was lack of opportunity. And in reality, in some aspects, it was a lack of opportunity. But oftentimes, one of the greater tricks is to fall victim to the fact that when Shaitan convinces you that things are worse than they really seem, or worse than they really are, you see what I'm saying? So you make these irrational decisions, have these irrational types of judgment that cause you to just go out and, this is that mechanism he uses to push you further and further away from the path. So again, like I said, I made a decision to go out and sell drugs and run the street and do all kinds of stuff at a very young age. And it took me 20 years to really stop and just really reassess myself and the way I had placed myself. And as with any human being, it took a real big drop for me to come to that. I was in the county jail facing 54 years in prison, federal and state charges. And I'm like, okay, they caught me, I was 32. And alhamdulillah, I seen the progression, like maybe a year or a few months before I got arrested on this last time when I went to prison. And it was like certain things were becoming unpleasant to me. But at the same time, in dealing with that situation that you're talking about, that paradigm you're giving us, a person has to really be detached from everything that's going on around. Going back to what Brother Malcolm said at the beginning, it's like you have these triggers. You know what I'm saying? And prison isolates you from your triggers to a certain extent. You know, because I was the kind, if I went to prison, it was like, you know, you got all kind of stuff going on around you. But I'm like, look, I'm in here, this, you know, petty kind of way that people going about doing stuff, you know, I'm a little bit more fluid than how I used to move. So I'm like, I'm not messing up with these dudes in here. So it was easier for me to be able to detach myself. And, you know, I love to read. So I go, people send me some books, and I really didn't care what was going on around me while I was in there. And like you said, it's easy to be given the impression that you're okay while you're in that situation, you know. And going back to what we were talking about last week, this is another form of oppression that we deal with, because oftentimes we're thinking that we're being honest with ourselves, but we're continuing to place these walls up around us that keeps us from seeing the nur that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts down for us to be guided by, you know. So within that context right there, Brother Malcolm, give us some insight how you view that situation. Because, you know, some people now, not putting you on the spot or anything, but some people don't look at their own actions as being a form of oppression against them. But as Muslims, a part of our understanding, and even to a greater extent, a part of our Aqidah, deals with that because of the concept of kasb, which is our acquisition of our deeds. Because, you know, we don't do, Allah does, but we acquire our deeds because of the decisions that we make, you know. So again, this speaking towards that, this give us some insight on how you look at that situation now.
Yeah, I kind of, you know, I guess I'll start with the worldly sphere, the dunya, the lower sphere, because in all honesty, I can't even really claim to really understand the spiritual ramifications of oppression, you know, totally. I don't think any of us totally can, right? Outside of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, right? But I do know, you know, I've been reflecting even before this program and before I knew about this program of some of the results in the world of oppression. So I think, first of all, it's interesting that sometimes those things that cause oppression can also be the result of oppression, right? So what I mean is that, and two things I kind of been reflecting on, that two things that cause one to oppress, which is fear and pride, right? Fear can cause oppression, and pride can cause oppression, and those can also be the results of oppression, right? And it can be the result of for the oppressed people, of course, because if a person oppresses one, then of course that can cause fear in the oppressed, and if a person oppresses, it can cause pride in the oppressor, right? But I reflected how that it can cause the same reaction in both the oppressor and the oppressed. So let me kind of explain, right? So first, if you look at fear, right? Fear is something that causes many people to oppress, right? For instance, like I give an example in our own scripture that we know about in the Quran. We know about the people of Fir'aun, and one of the reasons that the Egyptians oppressed Bani Israel is because they feared after the time of Yusuf. They feared the gains that the children of Israel had made in Egypt, right? They were becoming numerous, and they were actually reaching high positions in Egypt. So this has caused the Egyptians to oppress, and you know, Pharaoh kind of took that to even a further level, right? Killing the firstborns of the sons, and so on and so forth. Now, this fear, of course, this fear caused the oppression, and it caused the people that were oppressed to fear for their life, to fear for their safety, to fear for their children. And it also caused fear in the oppressor. And that might seem strange, but what happens is that when the oppressor oppresses because of his fear, he begins to fear even more because he fears a reaction of what the oppressed people might do, right? So his fear caused the oppression, and then the oppression caused fear, right? And then that caused more oppression, which caused more fear, and it's a vicious cycle. You know, the fruit of the oppression, the fruit of the fear was oppression, and the fruit of the oppression was fear. You see, so and one of the things I reflected on Frederick Douglass. He talked about this when somebody asked him about white fear in America, and he said that my reply to the alarm is easy. It is that the wicked flee when no man pursueth, and that the thief thinks each bush an officer. Right. So when a person oppresses, and if you've been in the streets, you know the people that do the most scandalous things are the people that are always looking over their shoulder. Those are the people who are in the most in fear because of their oppression. And a lot of the times this causes one to oppress even more. Right. And this has been seen many times in this country. And one of the biggest examples I think of this is slavery, right? And there also is a quote that Thomas Jefferson said that he spoke about this when he spoke about slavery, and he was very conflicted. At least that's what his writings seem to show, that he was very conflicted about this issue. I think a lot of Americans were, but he said that concerning slavery, that we have the wolf by the ears, and we feel the danger of either holding or letting him loose. Right. So now you have a person that is in a dominant position, who's oppressing, who has total domination over a whole group of people, a whole nation of people, right? A whole ethnic group. And there's this fear there of, if they let them go, what will they do if they become the dominant group? You know, how will they treat them if they get in those political positions to be the oppressor? There's always a fear there attached to it, right? So it's interesting how the oppressor also, because of his fear, he was led to oppress, and because of his oppression, he also gets more fear. And this is also one of the things that I often think about when it comes to police brutality, and as well as political prisoners, right? A lot of the times political prisoners were locked up because the government, or whoever the powers that be were, they feared these individuals. So they put them in these prisons and they oppressed these people. And now they fear letting them go because what they might do, right? And there's very few people who can live out the prophetic example, who actually was put in a place of power and conquered the oppressor and forgave, right? This is kind of counterintuitive to human behavior. But even like when Frederick Douglass, when he spoke about it, he said that it's ridiculous, the thought that, that we will even reach that position of power. So, and also police brutality, right? A lot of police officers know that they've witnessed or they've been the ones that inflicted brutality upon people. So they deal with other people in a harsh and oppressive way, because if they were to take it light or not be on their toes, then they would have to worry about somebody coming around the corner and be like that bush who they think is an officer that may come around and cause them harm, right? So this is a vicious cycle. Another one that I spoke about this earlier is pride too, right? And this is the last one that I'm gonna speak about right now, is that pride can also cause oppression. Right? If you think about like what Brother Tabari said, that pride is to view yourself as greater, right? Deny the truth or view yourself as greater than another group of people. So obviously that this can cause somebody to oppress. If you look at another group of people as subhuman, then it's easy to oppress that group of people, right? Because you don't see them as your equals. It's now, the interesting thing is that when you oppress because of your pride, other people of the oppressive group, they begin to actually believe themselves to be dominant. Because of their oppression, it makes them even more proud. It makes their children proud. It makes their offspring proud. And this is what you see a lot of the time in white Americans, that they feel their pride comes from the initial oppression in the first place, right? Their ancestors oppressed a whole group of people. And now it's easy, especially those that don't know world history, to think that, well, we must be better than you guys because we've been dominant over you for so many years. That causes them to be proud and then to be oppressive, and causes their offspring to be proud and oppressive, and so on and so forth, right? This is right.
That, yeah.
This is another one of those cycles, right? But now this is the interesting thing: how this oppression from pride can also cause the oppressed group to be proud, right? And I reflected on this just recently, a few weeks ago. And this is what made me reflect on it. I was walking down the boardwalk at the beach, and I ran into a guy. It was a young African-American brother. And he stopped me and he said, excuse me, why do you have that thing on? I had a throbe and a kufi on. And he said, excuse me, why you got that on? And I said, because I'm Muslim. So he salamed me. He said, assalamu alaikum. So I returned the salam and I said, oh, are you Muslim? And he said, no, I'm Hebrew. I said, oh, okay, interesting. I said, what gravitated you to that path? And he said, that's my birthright. That's my history. So I said, okay, interesting. I said, well, I'm Muslim, and I just believe that there's only one God, and that God is not anything in creation, and that nothing in creation deserves to be worshipped. He's shaking his hand, and I said, and that all people are equal. And as soon as I said that, his face turned up, and he said, huh? I don't know about that. And I said, what? I said, you think that the black ant is greater than the red ant? And then I said, or do you think that the sperm that you came from is better than the white man's sperm? And he said, well, I just think that, just that we just proved to be superior in our genes. I said, why? I said, surely there's white men that can 360 dunk as well, right? So we had a little conversation for a minute, and we left on common terms, right? To basically because we got on the whole children of God thing and all of this, right? And we left on what we could agree on, that there's only one God. But I reflected on how so many of our people, right? So many African Americans have this black supremacist mind frame because of years of being oppressed, right? What happens is that a lot of us, and you brothers have seen it, you've been to prison, a lot of people start reading these history books, and they learn about, and some are even exaggerated. Some black people try to make every great person black, right? But some of it is, is very true. They learn about the Babylonians and the Sumerians and so on and so forth. And what happens is that this is a good start. They say, okay, well, we're not inferior, but instead of staying right there, they go to the other end of the extreme and they say, as a matter of fact, not only are we not inferior, we're better than you. We're better than you. So a lot of the times, and I deal with this all the time, you have people overcompensating for their oppression by saying they're the best group of people, right? They're the superior race. And this was a result of oppression. You don't see too many Indian Americans, not Native Americans, but those from India, those from China, those from other places saying that they're the supreme race, right? You find this most commonly in white Americans and black Americans, at least my own personal interactions with people. And these are the two groups of people that have been the most oppressive or the most oppressed, right? So this is something that's also interesting. Another thing I found that was pretty interesting is that he referred to himself as a Hebrew, right? And there's a lot of African Americans that identify with that ethnic group or that ethnic struggle. This was also one of the diseases that happened to Bani Israel, right? In history and today, that this is a historically oppressed people, and their oppression has caused them to claim to be the chosen of God, right? Those who are closest to God because of their ethnic origins, right? And a lot of this is simply over compensation the oppression that they felt over the years. So I just say all that to say that, you know, these are some of the effects that which causes oppression can also be the result of oppression in the oppressor and in the oppressed groups. And it affects both groups similarly a lot of the times.
Well, I touched on that second part of what you said, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I've always had a big thing about, because in essence, I'm a child of the movement. My father, he had a lot of interaction, especially because I grew up in Atlanta in the 80s, West End Atlanta. My father took his jihad under Imam Jamil back in 1978, 79, when he first came to Atlanta and started to establish his community. And one of the things I saw, whether it was from the Pan-Africanist movement or any of the other groups, it was always this over exaggeration, if you will, of this idea of blackness. You know what I'm saying? To the point where that's one of the things that really turned me off from the movement, was seeing this, because you're saying that you're fighting against this form of injustice and racism and oppression, but at the same time, I'm looking at you act just as worse, if not worse, than the people who you're supposed to be up against. And a lot of that comes from these foreign ideologies that we try to adopt. This is another thing that I see as being the oppressive mind state that we perpetuate against ourselves. Just take all of the imperial and colonial struggles that happened over the last 70 or 80 years, people gaining their independence. And then the first thing that you do is you adopt the system that oppressed you in the first place. You don't get rid of the system, you adopt it wholeheartedly, and you become even more staunch advocate of that system than the people who were oppressing you with it in the first place. And the second point that I'm glad that you brought up is the idea of Bani Israel and how Fir'aun used to oppress them by killing the men and letting the women live. And if you take that and you look at our situation today, this is what they've been doing to us in our community. Okay? Although at times they do kill us, the men, but more often than not, the way that they do it is that they remove our manhood. They emasculate us. They take us and they break us down to these very pathetic, just to not have any less of a better word to say, a very pathetic shell of a man. And they do it by attacking the family first and foremost, because one of the things that they've done over the years that has really stuck against us, you know, is that while it's good for the sisters to get the money, they've given them jobs and positions where they make more money than we do when we are able to have a family. Okay, so that removes the opportunity for the man to be looked at as that provider for that family. So you've taken away that image of that protector, that husband, and all the father, all of these things. That image of him has been stripped from it. In addition to the fact of how they did us during slavery, where they would take the families, you'll start a family, wife, kids, and they're seeing this come up. Then all of a sudden he gets in his mind that he needs some money. So he takes me, he'll sell me over here 3 states. He'll take my kids and send them over to the Caribbean, or he'll send another one off somewhere else. Or either if he keeps us there, he demasculates us again by what he doing all kind of foul sexual acts to us and stripping our dignity and our honor away from us in front of everybody. And it perpetuates that cycle of, again, killing the men, letting the women live. Because now at the end of the day, you know, despite my best efforts to be that good person I want to be, when my spouse or my children look at me, what do they see? They don't see a man. They see this thing, you see? And that also made it easier, not giving any license to it whatsoever, but it also made it easier for a lot of men to step away from their families and just go on about their business like nothing ever happened. Or I got you pregnant, no, that ain't mine. Or, you know, it's just like, it's an acknowledgement, but you're there, but you're not there. We have all experienced that in some form or fashion. But I'm glad you brought those points up, because that's something that people don't really take into consideration. These are other, okay, yes, the actions themselves that happen as a result of this, they're oppressive. You shouldn't abandon your family. You shouldn't do these things, et cetera, et cetera. We understand that, and it's accepted wholeheartedly. Nobody disputes with that. But the actions that cause these things to come into being, this is a whole nother thing, you know? And one of the things that's really disturbing now is that although they've pretty much perfected this against the larger portion of our community, it's something that's being pushed off into other branches of society and other communities as well, but they're using different forms of it now, okay? And we all know that the destruction of the family has been one of the central components to this system within the last 50 years, you know? Hence the divorce rate amongst all of the communities, whether it's white, black, Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian, divorce rates amongst all communities is skyrocketing. I don't think it's any community that's under 50%, but that's something else we could talk about. Sheikh Rami,
yeah, subhanAllah, this is, we got a few comments on those joining us through Zoom, and I keep seeing it says real talk, and mashallah, this is real talk, and these your voices are healing. It's healing the community. We all need to hear this talk, and it's I mean, mashallah, they say a couple of the comments were real talk. And one of the questions I asked last week that we didn't really get to the discussions is I asked, you know, can we talk about the dynamic complex of where a person can be an oppressor and an oppressor, oppressed and an oppressor at the same time? And subhanAllah, I didn't even speak with Brother Malcolm, and he touched on that stuff. He talked about that, and in ways just like last week, I was listening to Ustad Tabari and Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin, and I'm getting insight into the Quran that I've never seen before. And again, this is coming from direct experiential knowledge. And I want to mention two things before I turn it back. And I know I said I wouldn't talk, but you know, I had it pulled up.
You always have the opportunity to talk about
what's
this.
that? Well, I had something pulled up. I was going to share it. I'll pull that up again. But we got a question from Brother Abdul-Khabir. One of our great long-standing Taiba students. He's out, mashallah. We love you, Abdul Khabir. We're making dua for you, and we're proud of you and all the work. This brother, Abdul Khabir, has a 30-volume commentary on the Quran. Each one is as thick as an old phone book. Now, most people watching, maybe if they're from the younger generation, don't remember a phone book, but everybody remembers a phone book, right? We used to use those to prop up our computers or to sit on, booster seats for our kids before maybe. So if you remember a phone book and from the big metropolitan areas, I'm not talking from like the city ones, I'm talking about the metropolitan phone books, the ones that used to have at the payphone. Anyway, his 30-volume breaking down grammatically and linguistically of the Quran is 30 volumes of that. He did that while in prison, mashallah. We used to have a copy here. I would have showed it, but it just shows that mastery of the ulum, of the sciences that's happening in prison that we don't necessarily see in free society. So Abdul Khabir asks, and I'll turn this to Malcolm because you were talking about that dynamic. He said, please expound on the words of Allah. Let not the hatred of others make you swerve from being just. And before I turn it over to you, I want to share with you something. I was talking with one of the Taiba students. I'm not going to mention his name just to keep it anonymous. But after I got off the phone with him yesterday, I was really shook, like physically and psychologically, because this brother, a very dedicated Taiba student, almost got killed yesterday, or no, the day before yesterday. Somebody came at him with a weapon, somebody he knew. I'm not going to give too many details, but he was living on the straight and narrow, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, you know, stable house, stable family, stable work, his own business. He's doing everything. But then somebody, because of Jahili, and it's also part of that oppressed person becoming an oppressor, because this person had a history of being oppressed themselves, and for whatever reason, they came at him with a weapon, and he had the chance to take that person's life, and he didn't. And it's going back to what Malcolm said, you know, there's split-second decisions that a person can make. And he told me, he said, wallahi, he said, the thing that kept me back from taking that person's life, I mean, because he wrestled the gun away, and the other gun that the person had, he got both guns. He could have done it. And he said, the thing that stopped me, he said, was taqwa. And I learned the depth of taqwa from the books about Taiba, and the poem that you translated and versified, Malcolm Ibn Ashir, it talks about taqwa, the definition of taqwa, and that's a recurring theme in the Quran. But he crystallized and his understanding and his realization, because he's from the street. He was in a gang. It's not what's the opposite of courage? Jabana, being punk or
Cowardice.
coward. Yeah, he's not a coward. It's not, he didn't pull the trigger because he was a coward. He knew how to do that. He didn't do it because of taqwa and because he loved that person. He told me, he said, I love that person. And I said, this just happened yesterday morning, and you've already, I mean, he was articulating his experience. He was still in shock, but he was able to articulate his experience and understand why that person might have done it, recognizing it's wrong, but still hoping the best for them, still loving them. And I said, wow, that is a deep spiritual state. And like you said, Malcolme, you know, we don't understand we can't explain or even claim to explain the state of being an oppressor, the spiritual state of what happens. But man, when you see the spiritual state of a person exhibiting taqwa, subhanallah. So he was in that moment. He said, Abdul Khabir is asking this question on our Facebook feed. Let not the hatred of others make you swerve from being just. And in that moment, he had what it took to say, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to save my life and save the lives of those around, because there was other people that were being attacked as well. But I'm not going to turn it around on you. And I said, wow, how? So please, Malcolme, like, tell us a little bit about this. How can we, that's a spirit, that's a maqam, that's a station with Allah that a person can get. And he crystallized that in prison. So tell us two things. Tell us about this ayah, let not the hatred of others make you swerve from being just. And then how is that happening to a person from the streets, and they're getting that deep spiritual in prison?
Yeah, I think that first, that, you know, to kind of just add on to the previous discussion about the pride and the black supremacy, that this black supremacy mind frame is a huge hindrance to dawah. It's a huge hindrance to dawah for us, because the mere idea that black people and white people are equal inherently is so hard for some of them to accept, right? But I bring that up to say that this is why we really need Islam even more, and this is why what you just mentioned, this ayat is the cure, and was the cure for Arab Jahiliyyah, and is the cure for our Jahiliyyah. Right. And one of the things that I want to say is that, and I've discussed this with several brothers, is that when I sit in a group of foreigners, right, and when I sat in a group of foreigners and we spoke about, we learned about Sirah, one subject of Sirah that was kind of difficult for some of the foreigner students, or those who grew up in America but didn't necessarily grow up in the inner cities, it was hard for them to understand was Jahiliyyah tribal culture, right? And this is probably the one part of Sirah that I think that was very easy for me to understand growing up around gangs, right? It was probably one part of Sirah that I had no problem understanding, because it's probably the closest parallel to Jahiliyyah Arab culture, right? Even the breakdown of the head clan and the sub clans. This is exactly how gangs are, right? You might have a large blood gang or Crip gang, and then you have the street, right? You might have the west side of the neighborhood and the north side of the neighborhood and the east side of the neighborhood, and within that you have a smaller clan, right? You have the block, and then you have within that block you have the clique, right? And it's the same way that the tribal the tribal setup was in Jahiliyyah culture, right? You had the Qurayshi, then you had the Hashemites, and you had, you know, within that you had the smaller sub clans, right? And so that part was easy to understand. And also the part of exceeding the boundaries, right? Because this is something that you're expected to do. This is something, if you take one of my homies, I have to take 3 of your homies. If you take 3 of my homies, I got to take 5 of your homies. And I heard you guys kind of discuss on this a little bit last week. This is the way of Jahiliyyah, right? This is what you have to do. And if you do anything less than that, you're considered a coward, a punk, you're soft, right? And so one of the things that I think that how Islam was able to cure Jahiliyyah culture, One is just the hadayah that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given by Allah, and the hikmah in him pairing different people from different tribes together, and pairing the Ansar with the Muhajirin, and all of this is guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And then this ayah right here, it is telling you that you don't let your hatred transgress the bounds or the limits of justice, right? So this can be applied to, and if a person has taqwa, that's something that I don't know how to inculcate. That's something that's every individual person has to do on their own, right? And a lot of striving against the self. But this can be applied to those who have tribal differences, right? Whether you come from the streets, Allah is not saying that He expects you not to hate those people or to dislike those people. It would be crazy not to have any feelings if somebody raped your mother or murdered your kinfolk or something like that, right? The hatred is perfectly normal, right? But it's the revenge that's taken out of context that's a problem, right? And so one of the things that Allah explained or commanded is that the revenge is not an issue, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly recommending forgiveness, right? But if revenge is sought, that it shouldn't be 3 for 1, that it should be just. Even the revenge must be just, right? And we dealing with early generations. They had Islam and they had taqwa. I think that for our people, that if we were to just get Islam first, then this would solve a lot of the issues that we have in our neighborhoods, right? Because this is what we still do right now. And even when it comes to other races, right? We've been oppressed for years and years and years. But now what do you want to do? You want to slaughter, you want to kill on mass scale, children, kids, everybody else. No, Allah says that, when you go to a war zone, fight those who fight against you. Leave the children alone, leave the kids alone, leave the animals and the trees alone. So this is why, I think for the Jahiliyyah culture that exists in the ghettos of America, Islam is the solution. And it's the only solution. We've tried everything else. We've tried socialism, Marxism, Leninism. We've tried everything else. It doesn't work.
Mashallah, I want to say one thing. This is, again, from a person who doesn't have direct experiential knowledge of some of the worst forms of oppression in the inner cities. And as you said, Brother Malcolm, like the chemical warfare, the efforts to split the family and so forth. But for everybody who's watching, who didn't grow up in the inner cities, didn't see the police brutality, didn't see unjust laws, one of the things that they're working, Khalid Alexander and Pillars of the Community, and please check out that Pillars of the Community San Diego. Look at their website, support it if you can. They're doing an amazing work. They're working on changing legislation like the gang enhancement laws and other laws that disproportionately affect people of color, minorities, people in the inner city. If you haven't experienced that, when we talk about crime and criminal thinking and the Jahiliyyah, it's not just in those areas. Those men in business suits in Wall Street, they got the same Jahiliyyah practices. You steal $1 million of mine, I'm going to ruin your company. That's Jahiliyyah. The same thing that the presidential administration does. Oh, you shut down this, we're going to shut down that. You bomb one, we're going to send a bunker buster. So that Jahiliyyah and this criminal thinking is not just in people who are incarcerated or people who did something illegal by the laws of the land. The criminal thinking pattern or the oppressor thinking pattern, the Jahiliyyah thinking pattern, can be exhibited by any person. So as we're discussing that, I would like all the listeners just to say, we touched on gangs, we talked about the Jahiliyyah, but that can come up in your workplace, can come up in your school, can come up in your family. Every person can be a Fir'aun. And this is what I wanted to share. This was one of the pieces of artwork that Malcolm did. I don't know how to pull it up on there. Take a look at that. You did this in pencil color or what kind of, tell us about this artwork. And it has the ayah. Look at that detail. And you won an award for this too. Look at that. I'm going to post it on the Facebook, but you put in the ayah. So this day, O Pharaoh, we shall deliver your body from the sea that you may be assigned to those who come. Surah Yunus. Look at that detail. Look at that. Tell us a little bit about this artwork.
Yeah, it's mixed medium. So I used a layer of pencil, colored pencil, and a layer of watercolor on top, and a little acrylic to get the colors more vibrant. But I think, my thinking behind that, right, is because one thing is that because the African American people are a lost people, right? I mean, because being stripped of culture and history, religion for so many years, we find anything a lot of the times to connect with our ancestry and sometimes to our own detriment, right? That's why I think, in one of the Taiba books that you guys mentioned, the quote from Imam Malik, rahimahullah, where he says that I dislike study of history or genealogy that's outside of Islam, right? Because even like for some African Americans, their want to connect with the ancestors so bad causes them even to worship the ancestors. And you see this amongst educated people. You see this among people with doctorates and everything else, starting their ceremonies by pouring libations to their ancestors, right? And a lot of it is just their want to connect with their lineage. That's why that's such a powerful ruling right there. But my thinking behind that was that even in prison, I ran into a lot of brothers who were on the Natarian path, right? Natarianism. And which is basically the idea is that it's the revival of the ancient Egyptian religion, right? And a lot of it is honestly, it's really just Hinduism under the names of Egyptian gods and goddesses, which the two religions may have actually been related, because even like Odinism, it's really just another form of Hinduism with Germanic names, right? But you hear now a lot of African Americans, now instead of equating themselves with Bani Israel, they're equating themselves with Egyptians, right? And they're saying that, well, we're the original pharaohs, we're the original Egyptians, right? I'm a pharaoh. I'm not a king. I'm a pharaoh, right? I'm a god. So, and I ran into a lot of brothers like that, right? And even to the point of beautifying the shirk and everything, right? But without getting too deep into their ideology, that to show them that the way of the Egyptians was go to your grave with as many jewels as you can, right? The pharaoh goes to the grave with wealth, with sacrifices for the gods, right? With material things. And at the end of the day, all of this wealth was dug up and put on display for generations later down the line, right? Your quest for immortality to be a king and a pharaoh, it was just an ayat to later generations that path was not the path, right? And all of the riches, it availed you nothing but to be on display for later generations, right? And to have your land walked on by who? By the Muslims, right? So it's kind of to show those individuals that that if you want to be a pharaoh, you can be a pharaoh. You want to take your wealth to the grave with you or attempt to, you can do that. But you'll just be an ayat just like the pharaoh before you was.
MashaAllah. And just a reminder, because I like to tell brothers and sisters when they go to talk about Kemetic culture and the Metanet and all that, our people were taken from West Africa. In the areas that they took from were controlled by Muslims. Our governments were Muslim governments. And for all of the methods, we were Maliki. Just got to put that out there. But seriously, Ustaz Tabari, you've been kind of quiet, brother. Share with us a little bit. What you think?
I'm actually enjoying everything that you are talking about. Alhamdulillah for the guests. I mean, he took the ball, man, and he's scoring all the points. So alhamdulillah. This is very, very beautiful. I just wanted to add one point about how a person can it's very, very important. It's very, very important that people have a basic understanding about Allah, His messengers, and the Day of Judgment. Okay, because if you understand that you will meet Allah on the Day of Judgment, because you believe in the trustworthiness of His messengers, it will prevent you from doing a lot of things. It will prevent you from doing a lot of things. And I had a very similar situation to the one that the one that Sheikh Rami described. But in this case, you know, I had a situation where, you know, I was a teenager and some guys were trying to kill me. And they ran up into my house and they shot the house up. It was 4 of them. I found all kind of bullet casings and everything. I'm in the house. And I caught one of them slipping. He was at another friend's house and he called me and told me so-and-so is over here. So I went over there with my big 357. And all I could see was blood on the walls. That's all I could see. But when I walk into the house and I pull that big 357 on him, it was like time slowed down. And my soul asked me, what will you say to Allah about this on the day of judgment? How are you going to explain this? And that was enough for me to put the gun down, because my friend pulled it out too. And I told him, no. That's it. It's over. And that incident actually squashed the beef that I had with these guys. So I just wanted to add that, you know, and you know, that belief in Allah, that iman, and like Brother Malcolm said, that taqwa, it will save us a lot of grief. It saves us a lot of grief. So, alhamdulillah.
But that's one of the larger things I think a lot of people don't really understand about us after we've become Muslim, or once we've repented and turned back to the path, is that once we really embrace this, you know, we have a lot of brothers and sisters, they're struggling with the full embracing of the deen. And inshallah, part of what we're trying to do is making sure that we're there to offer the whatever assistance that we can to ensure that they're capable of raising themselves up by Allah's permission. But for those of us who have been blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fully embrace what it means to be Muslim and strive to do our best to uphold these types of things, the situation like what Sheikh Rami talked about is almost, and like what you talked about, Tabari, is for me, that was one of the things that really helped clear my head up, because I grew up, like I said, I grew up around Muslims. My father had an interesting journey to Islam. After he took his Shahada, he became a Rasta. And then towards the last years of his life, he repented, took his Shahada, and he said he died upon La ilaha illallah, alhamdulillah. And, you know, one of the things he used to always say, like the last couple of years before he passed, he used to tell me, he said, man, I'm good. I got you straight on the path. I'm good. I can die happy. Allah be pleased with me, inshallah. So, you know, that was his thing. But like for me, it's because, you know, even like now you run across people that you know, and you know, guys will joke with you, or people will look to see what you're going to do. You know, you might go through the neighborhood and stop her off at some friends or family's house, and, you know, they're doing what they do, and you just stop them by to, you know, say what's happening, you know, move on about your way. And everybody's always looking to see what you're going to do. Or situations come up and they're always trying to, you know, figure you out, hey, what's he going to do this time? Is he going to do it? Or, you know, someone will come up and be like, hey, man, whatever you do, just don't get back out here in these streets. You know, I tell them, I say, man, you don't have enough money to get me back out here. It's like the deen for me, it's like, you know, like Allah says, if he has that veil over your eyes and over your heart and your hearing, it's like nothing nobody can do for you. Because all those years I was out there in the street, I believed in Allah, I believed in his messenger, but, and this is something else that we will be talking about, one of the things that actually kept me from fully embracing deen and going ahead and taking my shahada and committing to that was, unfortunately, other Muslims, you know? And again, like the brother was talking about, Islam being the cure for the diseases that's within our communities, in our families, in our homes, is we have a unfortunate propaganda system, in turn, and also a mentality that's being propagated, particularly within our community, from a lot of different fronts. All right, we're not going to get into the political aspects of that. A lot of us who are in the know, and there'll be another time where we could talk about that more clearly, where this could be explained to people. But again, for me, the defining factor out of all of this, and all of the things I've witnessed and learned over the years, is that it has to be an internal desire for you to want this. You know, you have to love Allah and His Rasul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is one of the things I realized a couple years in. And it's like, you know, I was doing what I was supposed to do, but I took my shahada while I was in the county jail on my way to prison. Okay? Because that few months prior to that, like I said, I was going to Jumu'ah. I wasn't a Muslim, but I'll stop what I was doing on Friday. I'll go to Jumu'ah, pray, and go back out and do what I was doing. But there were things that Allah was doing with me then. It was my transition period into actually just accepting what I needed to accept. And just take, for instance, one of the things that really defined that for me was 3 years prior to me taking my shahada, because next month will be 16 years since I took my shahada. And I got locked up on September 11, 2001 in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, mind you, I'm going to give you the short version of the story. I went out to go to the truck stop. I was hustling that day. And for whatever reason, I was out there by myself. I didn't know what was going on. I just thought, man, look here, I got this all myself. It's like this all day long. So that afternoon, I make my trip out to the apartments, go back across the street, and the police come up. So I run back up into the apartments. And long story short, I ended up going to jail that day. So that year, I got locked up that September. This was 2001. So Ramadan came in right at like end of November, sometime early part of December at this time of the year. So I said I was going to fast. Now, mind you, again, I'm still out there. I had to take my shahada. So I'm fasting, but I'm at the poker table every day. So, you know, I won't need, but I'm gambling and playing poker all day long. But again, I haven't took my shahada. I'm not Muslim. So, but the long or the short of the story is, a couple weeks after Ramadan was over with, and they caught me dead to the wrong, mind you. I was fighting the police and everything. Caught me dead to the wrong. Pulled the stuff right out of my pocket. They ended up throwing the charges out. Case dropped. Only thing was my parole officer was like, nah, I'm not letting you back out here. You got to go home. I was in Atlanta at the time. He was like, no, you got to go back home to Savannah. I'm not letting you out up here again. So I had to come back home. But that's just to say, that was part of that journey that led me into that. Despite all the other stuff that was going on with me at the time. And it brought me to a point, because this is something I reflected on years later when I actually did take my shahada. Because they had a Muslim dormitory within our county jail. Okay, and Imam Majid Ali, rahimahullah, he used to come in Wednesdays and Thursdays, I think it was, or Tuesdays and Wednesdays, give us 2-3 hour durus. And like for the first couple months, I didn't take my shahada, but I took my shahada right after I got indicted by the feds. And from that point, it was like it was something that clicked within me, because I seen a lot of other brothers that did the same thing. And we've all seen it. Brothers will be super Muslim while they're in prison and get out and just like, man, what happened to you? You know? And just talking about that brother's situation, for people who trying to understand, that's a perfect example of somebody who has truly accepted the deen. And that's the light of having the love of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your heart. Because again, that's part of what we're talking about now. The end result of working against oppression is to be able to exemplify the characteristics of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Forgiveness, hilm, forbearance, patience, rifq, gentleness with people, you know. And again, this is just part of the beauty of deen. And like the brother Malcolm said, we tried everything else. We can't find this nowhere else. Nothing else calls you to this type of balance. You know, alhamdulillah, that's my little spiel for the day.
MashaAllah. Thank you for sharing that, Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin. Malcolm, if you can close us out with a few comments. We do have one comment from the listeners. It says, Humaira says, Brother Malcolm should do podcasts for the youth. So, you know, and I know you're doing a lot of youth work with the youth. You were telling me about you're going into the high schools. You're talking to them. You're talking to the youth. And I know you're already doing the youth, but that's just that's one of the suggestions. But please close us out with a few comments and a dua.
Okay. How much time do I have?
We're going till about 4:30, so we got about 10 more minutes.
Okay. Okay. This is Bismillah. We talked about some of the causes or some of the things that happen as a result of oppression, right? And I kind of wanted to just briefly talk on what should be done about oppression, right? Of course we know we should resist oppression and not allow ourselves to be oppressed, right? But this is something that I kind of reflected on, right? And we talked, Brother Tabari talked about how there's different levels of oppression and there's different types of oppression, right? The oppression against the self, the oppression against others. And of course, you guys answered the question last week about shirk being the greatest type of oppression. And, you know, sort of to Luqman, it says that shirk is zulmun azim, right? It's a great, magnificent, great oppression. But I was reflecting on the fact that most major sins, or many major sins at least, involve some type of oppression, right? Especially those that are major sins involving another person, right? Whether this is robbing or adultery or whatever the case may be, right? These would be I think deemed as some form of oppression. And as we know that a minor sin can be wiped away with a good deed, right? Making wudu or something of that nature. And a major sin, it involves tawbah, right? It involves tawbah. And as we study, even when you study repentance, and as the tawbah students study in the mukhtasar of al-Akhdari, the conditions of tawbah, right? And we know that the tawbah for major sins typically have three conditions, which are you feel remorse for the action, that you leave the action immediately if you're involved in it, and that you have a sincere intention never to return to that, right? And when this major sin involves another person, that the fourth condition is added on, which is that you have to right the wrong. You have to return or restore what was lost in the commission of that sin. So I reflected on this, how this right here, this is justice, at least on a worldly level. That justice is not only putting an end to some wrong action, but it's also making up for what was lost, restoring what was lost, right? This is justice. This is why when we talk about justice, we talk about restorative justice, right? And one of the things that I thought about is that even, there's been a lot of talk lately. I mean, it's been going on for many years now, but there's been a resurgence about reparations. And I was thinking earlier about how I would love to hear the unbiased Islamic scholarly position on reparations, because as Abdul-Muhaymin mentioned, that a lot of the Africans that were brought here were brought from West Africa, and a lot of these were Muslims that were sinned against, that were oppressed. And true justice, it would seem like, would be to restore what was lost to these human beings, right? It seemed to me, in my very uneducated opinion, that reparations is in line with the spirit of Islam, and that no Muslim who's sincere about justice should be totally opposed to this idea, right? Because it seems like it's in line, at least from my standpoint. I don't really know what the scholarly opinion would be on that, but I say all that to say that true justice involves restoring what was lost, and a lot has been lost, right? You have whole communities that have been ravished and decimated, right? Families, generations of families. Sometimes I tell people that I can count on one hand the people that I grew up with, that grew up with a mother and a father in the household from the time they were born to the time they were 18 years old in a married union, right? This is something that, and this is not something that is just because Black men despise being fathers or don't want to be there for their children. A lot of this is truly systematic. So I think that for people that are engaged in the quest for justice, right, and seeing an end put to oppression, and I think that every Muslim has a part to play in this, right? I think, alhamdulillah, that you all at Taiba are doing an excellent job, because this part of this is restoring what was lost. What was lost in the transatlantic slave trade. Deen was lost, right? And as we started accepting these strange ideologies, humanity was lost, right? I heard one brother say that Allah is the God and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the man. And when you accept Islam, what it's really doing is it's making you a human, right? Without Islam, you're a lot more closer to animalistic tendencies and animalistic ways. Islam is just simply makes you human. It teaches you to cover up and to dress decently, right? Not to be running around naked like an animal, right? To be in a relationship and be married, and not to just breed with whoever crosses your path, right? So alhamdulillah, by teaching Deen, you're actually restoring something that was lost, right? This is justice. But I think for all of us that are engaged in this work, and as I said, every Muslim has a part to play, that we also have to keep our niyyah pure. And I'm speaking not only to the listeners but to myself, because of course my ears are closer to my words. But I think all of us as human beings want to leave our stamp on this planet, right? We want to write our name on the sands of time. And it's easy to engage in the work of trying to fight against oppression, to lose sight of the intention, to lose sight and to want to be known as a freedom fighter, or to be known as a charitable person or a good person, or to go down in history as a great man or a great woman. But once this happens, you lose that the reward of that act, right? Because once something is not done solely for the attention of Allah any longer, that act loses some of its value. And nothing in this world is of any value, right? That picture of Pharaoh, his casket wasn't of any value. The only thing that would have been of value for that ruler would have been any action that he did for the sake of Allah. Outside of that, nothing. It doesn't matter how much charity he gave if he didn't give it for the sake of Allah. And it doesn't matter the person that's fighting against oppression if they're not doing it for the sake of Allah. So I think that for all of us, as we strive towards justice and trying to restore some of the things that were lost to people that have been oppressed over the years, that we have to keep our intention pure and make sure that whatever we do, and I know that Sheikh Rami, you talked about, alchemy, and turning the mundane acts into an act of gold, which I think anybody who wasn't paying attention to that should go back and watch that, because that was very heavy right there, But us turning our action into actions of ibadah is simple. It just has to have that basmala on it, a sincere basmala, a sincere action done for the sake of Allah. And then however small our fight is against oppression, it's counted as a hasana, right? It's counted as an act of worship, as an act of ibadah. And so I do pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all, and as a ummah and as a nation. And the president has the "Make America Great Again" slogan. My new slogan for this year and beyond is "Make America Muslim." May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide America to be a Muslim.
Ameen. Allahumma ameen. Thumma ameen.
Ameen. We got to get some hats with that printed on it.
Working on it.
Alhamdulillah. Well, mashallah, it was great hearing all of the brothers, and I want to end by saying, you know, one of the ayahs that, because one of the stories that's constantly mentioned in the Quran, and I think the wisdom of it is because of the systems of oppression that humans can create, is the story of Fir'aun and Musa and the children of Israel, the Bani Israel. But one of the things Allah says about the children of Israel, Bani Israel, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلُهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلُهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. We want to give a blessing to the children of Israel, to the Bani Israel, and we want to make them imams in the land, and make them the inheritors. And you know, I know you said it, and we laugh and jokingly make America Muslim. Inshallah, that's a dua for us. That's a high goal. But you men, everybody on this panel, Ustad Tabari, Ustad Malcolme, Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin, you are imams. You are this ayah. You are just like Fir'aun, as you were talking about. He's a sign of God. You men are signs of God too, because you went from that place where you were oppressed, but then Allah blessed you and made you imams. And anybody listening, if any of these brothers are in your community, you invite them for a khutbah, invite them to lead prayer, invite them to give talk. They've studied the deen. They know how to lead the prayers. They have the qualifications to be an imam. Allah has made them imams in the land. And with you being in the forefront of our society and in the communities and working and all of the work, you are going to be part of that dua to make America Muslim again. And then that ayah says the warithin, the inheritors. And as you were talking about the idea, I've never thought about it like that. What is the Islamic view of reparations? But I know one of the matters that's discussed is that if somebody has some stolen property and it goes back generations, then you actually have to figure out all of that, the person who it's owed to, you have to figure out all of his inheritors and then distribute it, even generations down the line. So yeah, that's something that does need to be looked into. But you took it to a spiritual level, that one of the things that was taken was their Islam, and so now let's bring their Islam back to those inheritors. The work that all of you men are doing. Again, for the listeners, this book, I Should Have Never Joined a Gang, buy it in hardback on Amazon. Support Malcolme's work. I know there's an audio book for this. You can also get some of the books that there's Ustad Tabari, Islam 99, which is the intro to Islam. He's also teaching it at IOK in Southern California. It's available on Amazon as a table book, an intro to Islam. Ustad Abdul-Muhaymin has also authored a few books on our table curriculum, Fiqh 100, an introduction to the understanding of Islamic law. Again, these are all testimonies to the mastery of Islamic law that these men have done through their studies independently, before Taiba and with Taiba. We're just on that marathon, just giving you a cup of water as you're on your marathon. So thank you all for joining, and I've benefited greatly. I took a lot of notes, and I hope the panelists will join us next week as well, again, as we continue this conversation. And I think we have to look into this advice about the podcast for the youth. So maybe that's something that we can look into in the future. And again, as well, Malcolme's working for a great project in San Diego, Pillars of the Community. Please look at their website, support it, donate, support their work, visit, learn more about it if you're ever in the area. Brother Khalid Alexander, and listen to some of his talks. He had a talk, if you go to Believers Bailout, there was a talk that was done in Ramadan. Please listen to his talk. He's got some amazing stories about his forefathers as well. One of them who was a runaway slave and went and just listened to, I don't want to give you spoilers, but it was an amazing talk. It really affected me. So please look at the work of Khalid Alexander, the Pillars of the Community, and Jazakumullah khair everybody for attending and for those who are listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.